I was driving across a quiet stretch of highway. Nothing around for miles except for dark woods and long, empty roads. It was well past midnight, and I hadn't eaten anything since the morning. I was exhausted, barely keeping my eyes open, when I saw a dim, flickering neon sign up ahead. It simply said, "Diner." The parking lot was empty, but I was desperate. The place felt wrong as soon as I walked in. The lights were too dim, casting long shadows that stretched across the cracked linoleum floors. A bell jingled when I opened the door, but no one greeted me. The air was stale, heavy, like no one had been in there for years, even though it was open. I was about to turn around and leave when a waitress finally appeared. She didn't say a word, just gestured for me to sit at the back booth. Her face looked blank, almost lifeless, like she was moving on autopilot. When she handed me a menu, I noticed her fingers were pale and ice cold when they brushed against mine. The menu had a few basic items: burgers, fries, nothing fancy, but the food descriptions were odd. The letters seemed to shift and blur as I tried to read them. I went with a simple burger, figuring I could get out of there quickly. When the food came, it looked wrong. The burger was gray, like it had been sitting out for days. The fries were soggy and smelled like they had been cooked in rancid oil. But I was starving. I took one bite, and that's when everything changed. Immediately I felt nauseous, like the room was spinning. The walls seemed to close in around me, and suddenly I wasn't alone anymore. I looked around and realized the diner wasn't empty. There were people in the other booths, but they weren't moving. They were sitting perfectly still, staring straight at me. Their faces were pale, eyes sunken, and their clothes looked old, dusty, like they hadn't been worn in years. I wanted to leave, but something was keeping me there. The whispers started next, soft at first, but then louder, like they were coming from everywhere at once. I could hear them saying, "Join us," over and over again. I looked at the waitress, and she was standing behind the counter, smiling, her teeth sharp and too white. "You shouldn't have stopped here," she whispered, though her lips never moved. I tried to get up, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. One of the figures in the other booth stood up, walking slowly toward me, his footsteps heavy. He leaned in close, his face inches from mine, and I could see his skin was rotting, like he was already dead. "You can't live," he said. "You're one of us now." There was this diner, kind of a legend around town. Everyone knew about it, but no one really talked about it. They called it the last meal. The story was you could go there and order anything you wanted, like your final meal before dying. It sounded ridiculous, but me and my friends were always up for something weird, so we decided to check it out one night. The diner was off the main road, tucked away in this forgotten corner of the city. When we got there, the place looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Peeling paint, broken windows, but inside it was packed with people. Not a single seat was empty, yet the whole place was eerily quiet. No laughter, no conversation, just the sound of forks scraping plates. A waitress approached us and, without smiling, told us the rules. Order whatever you want, but once you start, you must finish everything. No leftovers, and remember, you get only one meal. Her voice was cold, flat. We didn't take it seriously, just thought it was part of the act. We laughed it off and ordered the most random things. Steaks, pancakes, ribs, all of it. The food came out fast, almost too fast, but it looked good and we were starving. As we started eating, the atmosphere began to change. The lights dimmed and the air felt thick, like it was harder to breathe. The other diners who hadn't moved or spoken since we arrived were all staring at us now, their eyes following every bite we took. At first we thought it was some sort of prank, but soon it didn't feel funny anymore. One of my friends started complaining about the food tasting strange. He said it was too salty, then bitter. When I took a bite of my steak, it tasted like ash, like it had been burnt beyond recognition. But when I looked down, it looked perfectly fine. The more we ate, the worse it got. The food tasted rotten, but no matter how bad it was, we couldn't stop. We had to keep eating. Then the waitress came back, but this time her smile was twisted, almost mocking. She leaned in close and whispered, "You have to finish. You don't get to live until you do." The other diners began to stand up, moving closer to our table. Their faces were wrong, pale, gaunt, like they hadn't eaten in years. They surrounded us, their hands reaching out, pulling us back to our seats every time we tried to stand up. One by one, we started choking, gagging on the food, but the voices in the room kept telling us to eat, to finish. My friend across the table suddenly collapsed, his body twitching, foam spilling from his mouth. But the rest of us, we kept eating, our hands moving on their own. I wanted to stop, to scream, but my body wouldn't listen. The next morning we tried calling each other, but one of our friends never answered. He had vanished without a trace.